I am the lucky mother of 4 wonderful young people. A few years ago now, when 3 of them were still very young, I made some soup for dinner. Now, you can imagine the scene. 3 small children under the age of 6. Meal times can be a bit of a challenge. And on this occasion, I'd made a special effort. I'd prepared homemade vegetable soup myself with real vegetables. I was proud of my effort, and I was proud of the result. I was officially a good mother. But the children didn't share my enthusiasm, and they could see that I was disappointed. So to make up for it, the eldest, aged 5 at the time, said, "Thank you for my nice dinner. It was very nice." And his 3-year-old sister followed with, "Thank you for my nice dinner. I'd better go now." And she left. Now, most of you probably don't notice anything strange about this situation, other than possibly slightly surprising politeness in such small children, thereby confirming my official status as a good mother. I, however, was not duped. I noticed what they had done, and I ran off and made a note of it quickly. They had reused phrases from a storybook, and they had done it in a way which enabled them to get out of their predicament in the best way possible. Flattery, in this case. They had reused phrases from a classic children's storybook called The Tiger Who Came to Tea by Judith Kerr. Now, in this story, a tiger arrives uninvited at Sophie's house just as she's about to sit down and have tea with her mother. The tiger comes into the house and eats and drinks absolutely everything. And then when he leaves, he says, "Thank you for my nice tea. I think I'd better go now." Does it sound familiar? It looks like the children had realized that this was an appropriate way to end a meal and to leave. Also very polite, taking into account my feelings. It was very considerate of them. Well, this kind of reuse of language is something that language acquisition and language use is part of. And so what we saw with the little boy is that he took the tiger's first phrase and he adapted it to suit his situation. So instead of saying, "Thank you for my nice tea," he said, "Thank you for my nice dinner." Then his sister repeated what he had said. Repetition is also very common in discourse, and it serves many functions. For example, we can repeat other people to show that we agree with them. We can use repetition to align ourselves with somebody else to show that we share a common viewpoint. It seems that this kind of reuse and repetition of the language from stories helped these children to acquire the English language, because what I haven't told you yet is that this scene takes place in France, and these children were growing up with 2 languages, with English and with Français. In fact, we are in France right now, and so I could speak to you in French. J'espère que ça ne vous dérange pas que je ne fasse pas ma présentation en français ce soir. And so looking at this kind of creative reuse and adaptation of language from stories was a way for me to investigate the important role that this special kind of linguistic input plays in the bilingual language acquisition process. Because I spoke English to the children at the time, but other than that, most of their experience of the English language came from stories. Stories, songs, nursery rhymes, children's film and television. And so I concluded that this kind of input played an important role in their acquisition process. In fact, I concluded that the language of stories is really important. It really matters the way we say the things that we say. And I realized that this kind of creative use of language that we've heard before or read before is something that enables us to react appropriately to a particular situation. Now, if we go back to the soup story, what we see is a trigger process. It seems that the mealtime situation that the children were in triggered the memory of the mealtime dialogue from the storybook. The children had clearly identified this as something appropriate for a situation like that. There's also another possible trigger process, that the boy's use of the tiger's first phrase triggered the memory of the second phrase in the mind of the little girl. This is probably because phonetic, semantic, and experiential relationships between words and ideas are in networks in our brain. They are neural circuits present, physically present in the brain. And the more we say a word or evoke an idea, the more we activate these neural networks. And so this can explain why the more we say or hear something, the more familiar it sounds. This is a kind of normalization or entrenchment process which takes place. We can understand the trigger process thanks to a concept called frames. Frames are unconscious structures in the brain. All our knowledge is based on frames, and every word is defined by the frames that it activates. Frames are so powerful that if I say a word, even if I tell you grammatically to do the opposite, it will trigger a frame. So, for example, if I say to you, don't think of a tiger, what are you thinking of now? So this kind of semantic triggering is something that happens all the time. If I say the word warming, it probably triggers a semantic frame of pleasant experiences, like warming your toes in front of the fire or warming some milk for a bedtime cocoa. Perhaps it triggers a collocation like heartwarming. Maybe my soup story and my children's lovely politeness was a heartwarming experience. But if I put another word in front of warming, if I put the word global in front of warming, this new collocation is going to trigger a very different set of semantic relationships in your mind. Just as other collocations like climate crisis or heat dome or crop failure, these are abstract scientific terms which create a sort of distance between the physical realities that they are labeling and the emotional experiences that are triggered in your mind. Probably a very different semantic network would be triggered if I said burning homes, dying of hunger, pain, or grief. If we distance ourselves linguistically from destroying ecosystems or killing endangered species, then in a way we are reinforcing the story that we tell ourselves that things just are the way they are in the world. These things just happen on their own, and they're beyond our control. So what can we do? We can reframe the stories that we tell ourselves. So when I say stories here, I don't mean stories like the tiger who came to tea. I mean stories that we tell ourselves about the way the world is and the way we are in the world. Stories about ideas like money, justice, economical and political structures, technological solutions, human nature, humans and animals. So we can reframe the stories that we tell ourselves, and we can do this sometimes with a small tweak. Sometimes a small change can completely change the story. We tell ourselves stories like, nature is a resource, and using words like timber transform forests into building materials for human use. Words like timber trigger a semantic frame in which the value of the forest is not inherent value, but it's seen in human terms of its usefulness. Another story like this that we tell ourselves is the story that the rainforest is the Earth's lungs. This is a metaphorical kind of framing in which we take human anatomy or animal anatomy and we map it onto another life form. It makes it easier for us animals to understand. But the conceptualization that is triggered is, again, in terms of usefulness rather than in terms of inherent value. So this kind of metaphor is an example of a really powerful kind of language that we have. Metaphors can enable us to construct, carry, and share big ideas, and they can have a deep impact on the way we see ourselves in the world and the decisions that we make about our behavior. Another way that language is really powerful is that it can be performative. In ceremonies, we make declarations, and through declarations, we can change states of being. We can change people's identity or status, or we can declare that an event is in process. So I wonder if it's possible to play around with conceptualizations and the stories that we tell ourselves by creatively adapting the language that we use to tell ourselves those stories. I could take the example of saying something like, people usually feel good when they go outside into nature, or spending time with animals can make some people feel really happy. If I do that, I am triggering the semantic frame of nature and animals as something that is separate from humans. But if I say humans and other animals, then I'm including humans in that semantic frame. I'm widening that semantic frame, and in a way I'm declaring the animal state for humans. Now, this example of reframing works because humans are animals. I'm not suggesting that I can reconceptualize facts by stating things that are what they cannot be. I can't perform reframing or reconceptualization by saying humans and other trees. That's not going to work. But what I could do is I could say humans and other living forms of nature, and I could expand the semantic frame of nature to put humans in it rather than outside it. Language is so creative. We can do so many things with it, especially when two languages are in contact in the minds of people who speak them. I can take a word from one language and I can put it and use it in the other. I can borrow it from one language to the other. So I could sit down and write a letter at my bureau, où je peux te demander de ne pas spoiler le prochain épisode de ma série préférée. Another really creative thing I can do with language is I can take two words and I can blend them together. So I could say breakfast and lunch becomes brunch. Or divulguer and gâcher deviennent divulgacher. Donc je peux te demander de ne pas divulgacher le prochain épisode de ma série préférée. Using that same process, I can take humans and other animals and I can blend them together and I can make a new word. I can make the word humanimals. I really like that word. And I think I'm going to use the performative power of language right now, and I'm going to declare myself a humanimal. Now, I wonder what would happen. Let's do a participatory science experiment. Do you want to help me with this? I wonder if enough people reuse and repeat a new word, whether it could become a new normal way of saying things. So, performative linguistic magic. I declare us all humanimals. Je nous déclare toutes et tous humanimaux. Now go forth and spread the word. Let's see what happens. Language and the stories that we tell with it are interdependent, just as we humanimals are interdependent with all other forms of life. Now, it's really important the way that we say things. It really matters. And it really matters that we have lots of different ways of saying different things. So this means that linguistic and cultural diversity are as necessary to preserve as biodiversity. thanks to this, we can collectively have lots of different ways of saying and being in the world. And then we can share from one language to another, from one culture to another. And we can have others' perspectives and perceptions of things, including the more than humanimal. We can expand the conversation to include all life forms. What we say, the way we say it, really matters. And so perhaps with some creative reuse of language, with some careful thought paid to the way that we say things, and the frames that are triggered and the entailments of those frames, perhaps together we can creatively retell the stories of who we are and the world that we are a part of. Maybe we could retell stories with simple linguistic steps. It's like child's play. So thanks for my nice tea becomes thanks for my nice dinner. People are inherently selfish becomes people are inherently generous. Nature is a resource for human economic progress. Development can become prosperity for all forms of life is humanimal's ethical responsibility. The way we say things really matters. And if we use language creatively, perhaps we can create new ways of being and saying in the world. Perhaps we can perform new possibles by declaring them. We could perform new futures that are sustainable, healthy, desirable, respectful, inclusive. And then we can pass those stories on, paying careful attention to the way we tell them. I believe, and I hope that you agree with me, dear fellow humanimals, that is a story worth retelling. Thank you.